Hi, I'm James Mina, Director of Opera Carolina, and welcome to this edition of Overtures, a preview to Puccini's Tosca. Tosca is Puccini's fifth opera. His first two efforts, Le Villi and Edgar, revealed a young composer whose musical and dramatic talents held great promise. With his third opera, Manon Lescaut, Puccini took his rightful place as the heir to the great Italian opera composers Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, and Verdi. Manon Lescaut was an unqualified success. 3 years later, Puccini would write his most beloved of all operas, La Bohème. And over the next 8 years, he would capture the imagination of the musical world for generations to come with his operas Tosca and Madama Butterfly. And by the time he was invited to the Metropolitan Opera in 1910 to write La Fanciulla del West, he was the most famous opera composer in the world. Even his early operas embodied the Verismo style, a style that would make Italian cinema, neo-realistic cinema, famous in the 1950s and 60s with great filmmakers like Federico Fellini. Verismo is about real people in real situations, rather than gods and goddesses, legendary figures, or kings and queens. Puccini's characters are real and could take their place today on Hollywood screens. In Victorien Sardou's play La Tosca, Puccini found a subject ideal to his taste, a dramatic and sympathetic heroine caught in a real-world conflict. Let me paint the tapestry over which the story of Tosca unfolds. The opera takes place on June 17, 1800, 3 days after the Battle of Marengo. Now, to contemporary American society, this battle and that date has very little significance. But to Europeans, it is a very important date in their history. On June 14, 1800, the armies of the newly anointed first consul of the French Republic, Napoleon Bonaparte, met the armies of the Austrian Empire under the command of General Melas in a decisive battle near the small Italian town of Spinetta Marengo. Now we have to keep in mind that for much of the 18th and 19th centuries, northern Italy was occupied by the Austrians, including the cities of Venice and Milan. At Marengo, the Austrian forces take the French by surprise, and early reports have it that the upstart revolutionary Bonaparte has been defeated. In Act 1 of Tosca, the sacristan gathers the church choir together to tell them of the Austrian victory and that they've been hired to sing a new cantata that evening with the great singer Tosca to celebrate the Austrian victory. But later in the day of the battle, Napoleon turned the tide and won a great victory at Marengo. This victory solidified his political position in France, paving the way for his eventual proclamation as emperor. In Act 2 of Tosca, our villain, Baron Scarpia, receives this unwelcome news. The Napoleonic fervor was initially received with great enthusiasm throughout Europe, for he and France stood for the toppling of the nobility and the rights of man, which such great authors as Voltaire had written about decades before. This human desire for freedom is something that graces the newspapers and news broadcasts even today. The conflict between the nobility and the revolutionaries of the 18th century and the war between France and Austria formed the backdrop of Puccini's opera Tosca. Our heroine is in love with the painter Mario Cavaradossi. Mario is a known revolutionary, a follower of Voltaire's ideas and a supporter of Bonaparte. He and Tosca are caught in the web of the nobleman Baron Scarpia, who is also the head of the Roman secret police. Scarpia uses his power for his own purposes, which include his desire for Tosca. Tosca not only takes place on an actual date in history, but it is set in 3 places in the Eternal City, Rome. Act 1 takes place in the church of Sant'Andrea delle Valle, which is just a few blocks from the famous Pantheon. Act 2 takes place in Farnese Palace, which today is the French Embassy. And Act 3 takes place on the parapets of Castel Sant'Angelo, which was built by the Emperor Hadrian as a mausoleum, but eventually became a fortress against invaders. Its iconic statue of the Archangel Michael is one of Rome's most famous landmarks. If you ever get to visit Rome, visit these 3 sites and imagine an act of Tosca taking place right there. So here we are in Charlotte, North Carolina, 112 years after the opening night of Tosca at the Teatro Costanzi in Rome. Now the critics on that first night were cool to this new opera by Puccini, which just goes to show that sometimes contemporary tastes need a few years to catch up with the genius of a creative master like Puccini. And I suspect that in another 112 years, somewhere in the world, there'll be a performance of Tosca taking place. Thanks for joining me for this edition of Overtures. I hope you'll join us for all of our performances at Opera Carolina. Don't forget to visit operacarolina.org for more information about our company and our upcoming performances.